Hello and welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM and on iPropertyRadio with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on social media at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Now, next this week, I have a returning guest, Mary Conway, Chair of the Irish Property Owners Association. And of course, we've spoken to Mary previously in her capacity as the owner of Janus Estates. But Mary, today, you're very welcome back to us today. And today we're absolutely going to be focusing on what is going on in the rental market in Dublin.
Hi, Carol. Thanks for having me back on. I think we're looking at the rental market in the whole country, probably. The focus seems to be on Dublin because that's where the greater population is. But really, it's impacting everybody all around the country.
It has been such a crazy week. I mean, I feel like every week we say rental news is dominating not just the media commentary, but social media commentary. And yet it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And just, the conversation always seems to kind of peak when there's new reports out. And so this week saw the report, the latest DAFT report. And I know Ronan Lyons shared some figures that might astonish people. So, for example, he talked about Ireland needing 10,000 new homes coming into the rental market or coming back to the rental market every month. That's a huge figure. It's a phenomenal figure. And at the moment, I think we've something like, just slightly over 2,500 coming in every month. So like not even a quarter of what we need just to get to a functional state. So that's just causing so many problems. So look, we might just break them down, and let's start with something that you and I have discussed on air in the past, and that is the continuing exodus of landlords from the market. It's not slowing.
No, if anything, it's probably, everybody's saying, oh, the eviction ban has been a great success and it stopped people being pushed out of their homes. We opposed the IPOA, Irish Property Owners Association, opposed the ban at the beginning because we said, what really is it going to achieve? Is it going to bring the homeless numbers down? And in fact, we've seen that they've gotten higher. So they based it, I think, on the fact that they had what they called a successful eviction ban during COVID. And the reason that it was successful was when COVID hit, nobody knew what was going to happen. And we had our people from Facebook and Google that went back to their own country, freeing up accommodation there. And then we had the boys and girls from Kerry and Cork and everywhere else that went home. And a lot of cases stayed at home and worked from home. So some houses were freed up to the market, and then apartments that were allegedly in Airbnb came back to the market. But landlords are leaving in droves. And my concern is, people will leave for various reasons, and there will always be a rate of attrition in any organisation or any industry. But the thing about it is nobody's getting in. And we need a functioning private rental market. So why are people not getting in? Well, there's reasons. The reasons that people are getting out, or the reasons people aren't getting in, is overtaxation and overregulation. And looking at a survey of European countries and what tax people are paying in other countries, Irish landlords are paying higher tax than any of the other countries. And then with regards to overregulation, well, we had the Residential Tenancies Act in 2004. And I think there's been something like 156 changes or 156 amendments to the Act in that time. And the RTB was set up after the Residential Tenancies Act, and they're the ones that enforce the legislation. So while everybody gives out about the RTB, they're really only doing what is in the legislation. So, the whole thing needs to be looked at and overhauled.
Well, yes and no in terms of the RTB. I mean, yes, they're working off the legislation that's there, but actually they're also instrumental in shaping the policy around it, as is reflected in all those changes you mentioned. But also they're kind of the adjudication body as well, and that has absolutely not been balanced. I don't think there's anybody that could defend I suppose defend the consistent pro-tenant and anti-landlord rulings that are coming out of the RTB, and then anything that does actually even go towards the middle in terms of balance. So where landlords who have been, really the victims of their tenants in some situations, there's no enforceability. So it's a lose-lose situation for landlords. And it's not about championing pro-landlord rights. It's not about pro-tenant rights. It's about getting that balance right so that there's a sustainable, workable marketplace whereby the people who are providing the service, the people who are availing of the service, both have rights and responsibilities. And that's not happening at the moment. It's completely one-sided, and if anything, that's getting worse. The changes that have come over the last decade and a half, nearly 2 decades, have made that worse.
Yeah, and the biggest concern, I suppose, for a lot of our members at the moment, particularly the older members, is that there is annual registration now. It used to be you registered to tenancy and you paid every 4 years, but now you need to pay every year, and it's €40 to register. It used to be 90. But the difficulty is they set up this very cumbersome website where you register your tenancies online. And I will be pretty slick at this stage. I've had plenty of practice and I still fall down. And it's something simple like putting in MC instead of MAC, or for ages there was a problem that I couldn't register a tenant because I couldn't get into the drop-down menu. It was Dublin City Council, but it wouldn't work for me. So the older members are just getting completely disillusioned. A lot of them wouldn't be computer literate. They have the most amazing paper records. But anything you send in by paper seems to take months and months to get a response on. So the system is pretty broken with regards to registration at the moment. And that's one big challenge for our members, as distinct from anything going on with tenants and, determination orders or adjudication or anything like that. And you'll hear organisations say that, there were so many invalid notices of termination sent, and it makes it sound as if the landlord has done something wrong or is out to shaft somebody very quickly. Whereas in fact, it is the paperwork that is the problem. For example, if you have a landlord living abroad, they need to serve the notice of termination. It needs to go into the Department of Foreign Affairs to be validated, and then it needs to be sent in. So everything is very cumbersome and clunky and needs to be streamlined.
Mary, only in the last week, it's looking more likely that despite all of the evidence that it hasn't worked, it does look like the eviction ban is going to be extended. How are your members? What's the feeling across your members about that?
They're very frustrated. They're very frustrated that it was imposed at the beginning. And there are lots of people that need to sell for various reasons. It could be the bank is chasing them down. It could be they have a family member that needs to move in. It could be a marital breakup and a property has to be sold. Like a blanket ban does not work. Does it work on an individual basis? The notices of termination are quite complex. And if somebody has been in a property for over 7 years, the notice period is 224 days, which is about 8 months. So if I serve a notice of termination today, I think it comes in around the 29th of September. So, there is a very long lead into somebody leaving a property. I suppose the problem is, because landlords have sold up, there's nowhere for them to move to. Yeah, and that's the biggest challenge.
It's such a disconnect. Now, I know there have been, even where we've had reason to be optimistic, certainly before Budget 23, in the weeks before or in the months before Budget 23, there seemed to be a growing acknowledgement by the state that actually we need to stop landlords leaving. And then obviously there was political landlord reputation and PR crises that made it unpalatable to do kind of what needed to be done in Budget 2023, and that's what we saw last year. But it feels like then this tokenistic, what was the latest one a couple of weeks ago? Fridges, a greater allowances towards appliances and fridges, and that just seemed to really anger the landlord community, because it was trivializing something so important, and then that just showed an absolute lack of understanding about this joined up thinking that actually, if more people are leaving, that means there's less supply, fewer people coming in, we're not creating new supply. So actually all of the policies are moving in the wrong direction. And just this week, I know Property Industry Ireland, PII, lobbied, and they were before the Oireachtas committee there, and they lobbied for landlords to be brought in to the Cronaha scheme, for the city scheme. I think just cities, not towns, which would be welcome. Have you floated that by your members, or what's their take on it?
I think our members are just, at the moment, they're just so caught up with rent pressure zones and the eviction ban and the taxation that really that's where their focus is. And like, we put a budget submission together, and we worked with IPAV, because IPAV see the results of landlords leaving the market. They see they're selling the properties. And, we looked for 25% taxing across the board, including PRSI and USC, and that the institutional landlords would pay something as well towards tax. We also looked for capital taxes reform. And if you remember the Section 23, that was a great scheme to generate the inner city back in the late 80s. So, sorry, late 90s. So, looking, what could we do to be constructive? And we put a whole thing to the government. And as you say, all we got was bridges.
That was just so frustrating. And actually, Sean Keyes, writing in The Currency this week, had a really good piece about rent controls. And, and I think he framed it that there's kind of an art to rent controls that has been completely lost in the Irish government. So the main issue with the Irish rent controls, and this is something he was putting forward, is that their failure to provide a balance between tenant protection and the supply side initiatives. So essentially, the difference between the rent rates for movers and for those staying or have been there after the introduction of the rent pressure zones in 2016, it was actually leading to significant problems on the supply side. And while I think most credible and good operators want strong tenant protection, we know that strong tenant protection is important in a contemporary rental market. But on the flip side of that, investors need stability and predictability. And I know some of the I suppose not necessarily solutions, but some of the policies that could be looked at to provide a bit of balance there might be to exempt new supply from the rent control rules, or another would be to kind of use the third generation rent control. So you're basically limiting the rent increases within a tenancy, but not this flat out what we've done, which is actually distorting the market. And we know from the stats that it's driving landlords out of the market. It's not creating new tenancies. And then the class of landlords, the institutional landlords who are creating new tenancies, are being chased out of the Irish market, reputationally anyway. So, what needs to be done in terms of policy to turn this around? And do you think the current government have the wherewithal to do that?
I don't think they do, because housing and health have been the two biggest challenges for the current government. And really, they've failed on both. And what could they have done with housing? It's difficult to know, but the biggest thing is the supply, and penalising small landlords for the fact that government haven't built social housing is only driving landlords out of the market there. And you made a relevant point. And my big concern is, landlords are getting out, nobody's getting in. Why are they not getting in? Because if I have a property today and I have had my good tenants for the last 10 years and they've been able to cover my mortgage and maybe a little bit surplus to pay my tax, and I've kept the rent very low. And for example, it's €1,000 a month, and the going rate in the area is €2,500 for a rent. We're talking about a 3-bed house somewhere, and I sell it. It's going. No investor is going to buy it because they're stuck at my €1,000 plus the 2%. So if that could be reversed, that the rent would revert to market rate, that would be some incentive for some investors to get into the market. You hear all the things about landlords getting all this money from HAP, and very large amounts of money are going out from the government. Why wasn't some of that money put into housing? But then you have the other side of the story, is that who's going to build the houses? Because number one, we don't have the people that are trained. We haven't been encouraging people into apprenticeships. And then if we bring people in from abroad, where are we going to house them? So, we're going round in circles with this.
Yeah, no, it is crazy. In terms of that tenant in situ, look, the Taoiseach made some. Look, I think he made some comments this week that I suspect might have been a little bit off the cuff, or I don't know, was he doorstepped or what? But he made some comments there that essentially, even say the owners of vacant properties should be required to just take whatever, if their property is identified, should be required to take whatever tenants the local authority wants to put in there, or whatever rates the local authority wants to put them in there, and the owner of that property should just accept it. Really shouldn't even have a say in it. And he was referring to a Danish model, which I'm not familiar with, but it just seemed like such a flippant way to essentially take the ownership, or the rights away from a property owner, to the point where I feel that maybe some of the comments were made maybe without fully thinking them through. But it points to a really serious problem we have in terms of policy. And quite frankly, we have less than half of the current government lifetime still to go. There's a new party most likely going to come into place. And this has really been tackled in the media around that, trying to question, why does the Irish middle class have such a fear of Sinn Féin? So, can you speak about maybe how your members are feeling? Is this a change in government, and the whatever policies might follow? Is that something? Is it accurate to say there's a fear there?
Yeah, there is, because Article 43 of the Constitution, this has been trotted out time and time again, that extending the eviction ban, or provide the eviction ban was for the common good. But the government can't give protection to one citizen over another. So Sinn Féin they come in with different things on different days, and they've talked about a rent cap for 3 years. They've talked about a blanket eviction ban, and that's completely interfering with somebody's rights, their independent rights of the property that they own. So that is causing fear among members. I had somebody who rang me during the week, and he said, I want to do, she's been a great tenant and all the rest, but I want to sell my property now because I need to be able to clear my mortgage, because if Sinn Féin get in, I mightn't be able to sell it. And what do I do then?
I think a lot of the opposition commentary is calling for just keeping the tenants in situ. Could that work in Ireland?
Yeah, it sounds lovely in theory, but my experience as an estate agent, and other estate agents will tell you the same, like working with the councils to get a sale over the line takes so long. And the council then mightn't automatically want to keep the tenant that's there in situ, because where are they on the housing list or wherever? Where is the fairness in it? It sounds lovely. They won't give probably the market rent for the house. And then there's so much red tape in getting it across the line that it can take 6, 9, 10 months, maybe longer. Whereas if you put the house on the open market in vacant possession, you get your sale done quicker and at market rent. You see, there's this perception, I think, that landlords are a charitable organisation, that, we don't have mortgages, we don't have costs, that we don't pay taxes, whereas a lot of landlords are just surviving from month to month. And I know somebody will hear this and say, oh my God, they're all loaded. What is this woman on? But I know from my own personal experience at the moment, with the mortgage interest rate gone up in trackers, my cash flow is completely non-existent. And I'm just afraid at the moment that if a boiler or something goes, then I'm not going to have the money to replace it. And that's the reality for me and for a lot of other landlords.
Yeah, I
But
think
that's not the
you're
perception in the
right.
media.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's a total misconception out there, and actually, you and I were at an industry event very recently where we had reason, and I'm not sure if you heard the discussion at the table, but there was one of the event kind of organizers was sharing her personal experience. You know, she works in events, but herself and her partner have a property, and she was just talking about the challenges of that, and essentially with the tracker mortgage, the challenges that she was facing coming off that. And I think that if one of the best things we could do is maybe educate not just policymakers, but actually the wider community, because the wider community have this perception of fat cat landlords, and it's so far from the reality. And if they could hear the stress that this particular young woman and her partner were under, and the home, they had never intended to be landlords. Yes. It was their starter home that through negative equity and otherwise, they just weren't in a position to sell when their family expanded and they need to move on. So they never set out to be landlords. They certainly didn't want to be. It certainly wasn't a profitable experience, and isn't a profitable experience for them. So you've got, in the same way that we've got people locked into the rental market, we've got people locked into providing that rental as well. And it's not working for either. It's not working for either party.
Yeah, 85% of landlords have 1 to 2 properties, and they provide 53.5% of the rental stock in Ireland.
So why is that not reflected in policy? I mean, sorry, that's an unfair question to ask you, because I know that you and your members are frustrated with that. But I suppose, you know, and again, I'm conscious of time and we need to wrap up. But I'm really interested to know, kind of from the perspective of the Irish Property Owners Association, is there any sense of optimism that policymakers understand the dynamics at play?
There isn't, because we have been saying this for a very long time. We would know from calls coming into the office how frustrated people are, and, you know, that they want to get out of the market. And it's something like 7,000 tenancies a year are being lost at the moment. You know, and you quoted Ronan Lyons there saying that we need 10,000 a month. I mean, these are properties that are already built or are already there, and they're being lost to the rental market, and they're never going to come back. And the institutional landlords are providing about 16,000 properties in total. So, you know, our members are providing a lot more accommodation. But, you know, I think what happened was the government decided that it would be lovely to have the institutional landlords because they would provide nice properties and it would all be above board and there'd be no shoddy. You know, they got rid of the bed sits and they didn't see the consequences of that. I think they're now trying to get rid of the small landlords. And it's funny because I read something on the UK, from the UK this morning. Pretty much the same things are happening over there. The only difference is they're able to put up the rents. We're completely stuck. I mean, when you see all these reports and they say, oh, rents are up by 17% and others, you say, but where? You know, all my members can do is put it up by 2%. Yeah. So where are the figures coming from?
Do you know, Mary, I take on board exactly what you're saying in terms of the private or individual landlords. But to be fair, the PRS, the institutional landlords, they're being pushed out too. The policies are really, and there's been such an inconsistency in the policies there that we know it's leaving Ireland Inc. in a very vulnerable position when our reputation is being viewed by international money. You know, we know that Ireland's inconsistency in terms of policy making is a really big problem.
Yeah, and without the institutional landlords, you know, we will be in a worse situation because they are providing a lot of accommodation in the city. But, you know, our members are really rural for the most part, and, you know, what's going to happen down in Leitrim and Longford and wherever when landlords are getting out of the market and there's nothing being built down there to replace them.
Before we finish up, have you, because I know that you work probably more closely with policymakers maybe than others, so is there any reason for optimism kind of for private landlords over the next kind of 18 months?
I don't think so, not unless they look at the taxation and that they look at the regulation.
In order to turn the ship around now, how severe do the changes need to be?
they need to be quite severe. And I don't think it's going to happen because the populist vote is against the landlords. So, we're up fighting a losing battle.
Yeah, that's really discouraging. And, honestly, if we were having this conversation, certainly last summer, I was really genuinely starting to see some reasons for optimism. I believed that our policymakers and that our politicians were coming around to the idea that they would need to make some tough calls. But actually, we saw the minute there were landlord scandals across the political classes, all of that rolled back. So, in fact, if anything, we moved backwards instead of forwards in terms of policy. And what we got were greater.
I mean, when you sit at a table with Focus Ireland and Threshold and, the various organisations, and they're all saying, look, can you give the landlords some support to stay in the market? Things are fairly bad.
Yeah. Okay. Mary, look, thank you so much. As always, I'm deeply appreciative of your time, whether it's in your capacity as owner of Janus Estates or through the Property Owners Association. Please do stay in touch with us, because so much is changing at the moment. It does feel like we're coming to a bit of we're coming to a point where action is going to need. We're going to need some strong action, whether it comes or not. I feel like we were in that position 2 years ago, and even 3 years ago. We've been getting to there since 2016, and maybe even earlier. But it feels like the government has a very short lifetime in front of it to turn things around. So actually, if there was ever a time for bold action, this is it. So, this might be something we see. But as always, thank you so much for giving your time. We need to take a quick break now. Stay tuned.
Thank you.